playable, so we have like a suitable platform, something to extreme.
Yeah, just have a couple of platforming elements where we can jump things and stuff and have the idea of the level.
Okay.
All right, we're back. We are COMP305 in the fall 2019 semester. That's at Centennial, Game Programming 1. And we are lesson 4, or week 4, part 1 of our broadcast. Today we're talking about collision detection. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. One of the things that I've got, if you look up online, is I've also posted assignment 2, which is going to be due week 7. So you have a few, a few weeks to get that done as well. So we'll talk about that. But what we're saying today is we had this project we've been working on for the last few weeks. MailPilot, we're using it as a demo project so that you guys can get going. And last week we kind of talked about different kinds of collision colliders that we can put on our objects. And what we want to do here is we actually want to do the collision detection this week. So again, if you look at my object, I have my player object. They have a smaller collider. I'm using a box collider here. And we went to the prefabs for our cloud. So if I look at the cloud object, so if I go to cloud and if I go to, you can see that this is a polygon collider. And the way to open this up, so again, if you're going to modify the collider for prefab, you're going to go to open prefab. You can see here that we've got this polygon collider. That's what we did last time. And then finally, for the islands, we can open prefab. You can see here I've also got a box collider. However, maybe what we want to use here, just to make a difference, we'll use all different ones. Let me just take this away for now. And let me add instead I'll add a circle collider, just so that you can see that there's advantages and disadvantages from using each one of them. I'm just going to modify this one just to make it slightly tighter, and then move this just to the side. Just so that it's tighter. Again, you can do this numerically as well. So if I said like 0.2, I might not be so bad. I mean, it's tight enough that it's going to be good enough for our game. Okay, so that's our colliders. We talked about that last week, how to do it. And this week what we want to do is we want to make this kind of work now. Okay, we want to make the game kind of happen. Again, we still have the ugly divide, but don't worry about it for now. Okay, so again, last we left off, our game is in this state where we're running and we have these clouds and so on. Right, there we go. And what we want to do now is I want to do collision detection on these things. So there's a couple of things we can do. One, first of all, where do you think the collision detection should go? So we have some options. One is we can use our game controller. Game controller, that script is kind of independent of everything else, it's just sitting there. We can also put it on my player controller. So the scripts we have right now, we have a few of them. We have our player controller, we have our ocean controller, we have our island controller, we have a bunch of them. So, I mean, should I put them? I can put them on each of the game objects. A cloud controller, I can put it on the island controller, I can put it anywhere I want. Where do you guys think it should be? Player. So player is the natural thing to do because there's only one player. There's many objects, so you can do a lot of the decisions in there. All right, great. So let's go into the player controller. And let's start typing. So again, one thing we could do is we could start thinking about how to detect collisions. And one of the main functions that's built into Unity to help us do this when my Visual Studio decides to comply. And again, you can see that this is outside the public check bounds function. We're going to make another one, another public function that we're going to call OnCollision enter 2D. This is one way of doing it, is OnCollision enter 2D. And OnCollision enter 2D has a collision 2D element. There it is. And we can call this element whatever we want, this parameter. I'm going to call it other. And all I want to do is can I detect any collision whatsoever when one object collides with the other one. So I'm going to say debug.log and then, collision detected. So do I detect a collision when I use this form of collision detection? And immediately we're going to see that there might be a problem. Let's talk about what the problems are. So again, this is going to run, this OnCollision_Enter2D is actually going to run its own thread. It's an event that's going to occur, right? It's not something that I need to do anything with. I don't have to put it in the update function or anything like that. It's going to do its own collision checking because the collision system, the event system is built into Unity, is using this thing. So again, I'm going to run this thing, and of course that's not where I want to run it. I want to run it here. I'll be okay. And when I run it, immediately you can see that there is like 0 collision detection, nothing happening, right? So why could this be? I mean, we have colliders and everything, we just did it. So what do you think the problem might be? And if you did the course COMP391, you should have that answer. What did we do? What is it that's missing here as a review that it won't collide? We have colliders, we have OnCollision_Enter 2D. What's the problem? Huh? Rigid body. For 2D, you need a rigid body. All right. So on one object, there must be a rigid body on one of the objects that's checking the collisions. Okay. So again, if we go back, we're using it on the player object. That's where it's natural that we would put it there. So again, I'm going to open this up, and we're going to go and add a component, rigid body, 2D. Now, if I add a rigid body 2D, and this is totally cool to do. Here's my rigid body 2D. Notice my body type is dynamic. I could use kinematic as well. That's the other option. That's the enumeration here. Kinematic, dynamic, and static. Those are the 3 options. Okay? So kind of okay. One thing I know is that my mass is going to be 0, and my angular drag is 0, and my gravity is 0. I'm not going to actually be affected by gravity here or anything. I'm good to go with this kind of stuff. I'm also not going to put any constraints in here. Although I could. I think it's a bad idea to put constraints in this kind of situation. So now let's see if it works. So all I did was add a rigid body to my player object, and now do we have collision detection? We do actually, but what's happened is my player object has disappeared. Funny enough that this didn't happen. We didn't get an OnCollision_Enter2D. It actually didn't work, right? So again, the thing to check, of course, is the scripting API. So here's the scripting API. Here's OnCollision_Enter2D. Notice there's a collision 2D type. It's void. Let's just take the public away. Not that that will make any difference. OnCollision_Enter2D, void. It's got to be collision 2D as well. It says collision, but it could be anything you want here. And then some kind of log would be logging this thing if there was any collision with my player controller. So that's the second thing. So we're not getting a collision at all. Otherwise, it'd be coming up here. It's working because we saw my player disappear, right? So going back to this, if I was to save this, run this, and then we collide, we can see that I'm colliding, but I'm not getting anything on my console, which is bad. I don't know if you noticed that. So the collision itself is working, but this is not working. Okay. So one thing we can also check is does everything have a collider? Again, I do have a box collider 2D here. I have a rigid body 2D there. So I know that this is true. In my cloud, I have a polygon collider, which is fine. And in my island, I also have a circle collider. All of them have colliders, and yet they're not detecting collisions. So what could be the problem now? Here's my rigid body 2D. Here's my, player controller. Here's my box collider. What could be the problem? Well, that's something else. That's another issue. That's something that this trigger is the answer, but that's not what we're talking about here. So because we're not detecting a collision, and in my console, notice I didn't even detect the collision happening, right? So again, on my player controller, here's my player controller, right? And when I double click on my player controller, you see that there's a bit of a script here, but it's like it's being ignored, right? So player isn't detecting any collisions using OnCollision_Enter2D. It's not. There's no collisions whatsoever. Otherwise, this would kick off, right? So what else? What else could it be that's causing this problem? Well, let's do what you said. Let's make it a trigger instead, right? So let's see if we're still going to get that problem. So this isn't going to solve our problem. If there's a problem with it, it's going to be a problem here too. So again, is trigger. I'm going to click this on. What this does, the difference between a trigger collider and a non-trigger collider is a trigger collider doesn't kick off any physics. So it's like it'll allow you to pass over it, and it'll raise an event, but it will not actually trigger the physics actions on the object. So it's like things like gravity is not going to work, or when you collide, it won't create a collision response. All those things will be ignored. Okay, so trigger colliders are great for things like trap setting. I want some kind of spawn point that I want to reset to. You know, all kinds of different things. You know, you pass by a certain point of the level, and it creates you know, it summons the boss monster. Or maybe you have a quest system, and when you go by that certain, you know, checkpoint, then what happens is it shows you that you've completed a bit of the quest. All that stuff is great for trigger colliders. All right, and also for 2D, trigger colliders work pretty good. So let's try this now and see if the trigger collider thing works. But we need a different script. So let's just comment this out. The event for a trigger collider is a little different. It's on trigger enter 2D, and instead of collision 2D, we need collider 2D. So this one. So this is different. That's the only difference. So the type of collision object we're getting is different. Collision 2D, collider 2D. On trigger enter 2D means when the object enters another object or overlaps with another object, it raises this event. And again, what we want to do is a debug log to kind of detect that anything is collided with this whatsoever. Alright, so we're saving this and we're running this, and let's see if this is going to work. So again, you can see now that we're getting collision detection. And there we go. We're getting a bunch of collision detection. This is good. It's all good. Are you with me? So collision detection is happening, but I really want to know which object I'm colliding with. One thing to note is we want to be able to tag all of our objects. That the tag property of each of the game objects is one of the easiest ways to detect which objects you're colliding with. So here, my player, I'm going to tag it as a player. And then inside of my assets, here's my prefabs. I'm going to go to cloud, and it should be tagged as a cloud. It is. Island should be tagged as an island. Ocean as an ocean. We're all good to go. So now in my script, what I can do is I can detect, I don't need this anymore, I can detect which object is being collided with. So let's do that. So I'll do a switch statement, and what I'll do is I'll say, okay, the other.gameObject.tag, right, is the one I'm switching, and case if the tag is cloud, then do something. Case the cloud the tag is in island, then do something else. So those are the ways we can detect which one's being collided with. Now, one of the questions I had this morning is like, why other.gameObject.tag? Well, other represents the other collider that you're connecting with. So you have a collider, it's detecting that there's another collider that you've overlapped with, which is raised in the event. And then you want to say, okay, well, that whatever the other collider is, whatever game object is parent to that other collider, get the tag from that game object, and that's the information that I need to compare which one is being collided with. Okay, that's what's happening. And this is using object chaining, just like we've seen in many other languages, where you have an object that has another object inside of it that further has an object. Alright, so if it's a cloud, let's do a debug.log. Debug.log then, and we'll say collision with cloud, right? And we'll do the same thing with island, so that way we can detect if it's a cloud or island that we're colliding with. Island. And this is the beginnings of how our game will form out. So we have some basic objects, we have movement. We've done that over the last couple of weeks. Now we're actually doing we're going to complete, or try and complete more of our first playable. Alright, let's see how this works. So again, running it, we're going to kind of connect, and you're going to see that in the console, it's going to say collision with cloud, collision with cloud. How about collision with our island? I haven't been lucky enough to do that. There it is, collision with island. So I can detect the differences between cloud collisions and island collisions. Fantastic. And this is what we wanted, right? So now that we have this, we want to give user feedback to say, hey, you've collided. And one of the first things I like to do is, there's two ways we can go here. I can create my scoreboard right now, or where I think I want to go first is I want to create some sounds. So when I collide with an object, I want to create a sound effect that tells the user that, hey, guess what, you've collided with me, or whatever. We have a few sounds that I've put inside the assets folder. And under audio, you can see that there's a few sounds: engine, thunder, and yay. Okay. Now, again, here's a question again. This is from a game engine, kind of forming out or programming, if you will. Where do you think we should A, store these sounds, B, access these sounds? How do we do that, right? Should I store all these sounds in the player object? That's a little overkill, in my opinion. Should we store these sounds in an audio manager? We could probably do that, but that's a lot of work too. Or how about in the game controller, right? And if we store them at all anywhere, how do we reference these objects later on? Because I want to be able to access these objects, reference them, and then do something, right? Like make these impact sounds or impulse sounds. So when I run over an island, I want to make the yay sound. When I run over the cloud, it's going to make the thunder sound, and so on. And in the background, I want the engine sound to run, right? So how do I do that? So my thoughts are, game controller might be the right thing to do, right? So here's my game controller. Right now I have a reference to cloud and island, but I want to create some additional things here in terms of access to these sounds. So these sounds are all audio sources. And what I have to do is, I can drag the first one on, for example, the engine sound. There's my first one. And when I do that, it creates an audio source component. I'm just going to remove for now the game controller script from here, just so I kind of realign some of the stuff from my game controller. I want to add another audio source, and I simply cannot just drag another one on. It's actually going to replace the one that's there. See, it replaces the audio clip. So I can't do that. But what I can do is I can add component, and I can type in audio source, and I can add another one. I can add as many audio sources as I want. So audio source 2. Well, that's going to be the thunder sound, as an example. And then audio source 3, well, that's going to be the yay sound, let's say. That's my yay sound. So a few audio sources here, there we go. One thing to note is I don't want them to play on awake, none of them. So I want to not have any of them play on awake. Play on awake means as soon as this thing starts, it's going to start playing a sound. I want to control all my sounds being played. Here's the bad thing about this. I cannot see at this level when they've collapsed what the audio source names are. I have no idea yet. And there's a few audio sources here. I want to be able to map to these audio sources or track them, just like I did the clouds. So in order for me to do that, I need a bit of code. And I'm going to drag back my script onto this thing. So I'm going to take my script. I'm going to go back to my game controller, drag it on. There we go. Let's fix this up. So again, we have our cloud and island. Now, right now, what I'm doing at this particular stage is I'm just dragging it from my prefabs. However, there is a case for doing this programmatically, because what I should be able to do is take my script, drag it onto any of the objects, whether it's a game controller or a camera or whatever, and these things should fill up by themselves. That's how it should work. But for now, so this is number of clouds 3. We don't have a cloud size yet because we're going to generate it, and this is so far what we have. Let's go to the game controller for a second. So what I need here, and this is number of clouds, these are scene game objects. I'm going to put these together just for now. What I need here is another grouping, right? So I want to kind of talk about audio sources. So my header, this is going to appear inside the editor, would be audio sources. And what I want to do is I want to have, okay, we did a list last time. Let's do an array this time. Okay, just to show you the difference between a list and an array. They're very similar. I'm going to make a public array of audio sources. So I'm going to make an audio source array, which I'm going to call audio sources. Okay, that's my audio source array. As soon as I do this and I press save, and if I go back to Unity, you can see that two things are going to happen. One, another header comes into play, audio sources. Right now the size of my audio sources is 0, and there's a few things I can do. I can modify the size here to give me some room, or I can drag and drop. What I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to modify the size here. I'm going to make this 3. When I do that, it's going to give me 3 slots for audio sources. Well, guess what? Here they are, right here. So I'm just going to do one of these. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, in that order. So what I just did was I just kind of dragged components from the same game object to another part of the game object. Again, it's okay to do this, not optimal later on. We're gonna optimize this in the next tutorial. So when we start doing the platforming tutorial next week, all right, this is when we're gonna do this kind of stuff, more optimizations. For now, we're in a let's get it working phase. All right, so again, we've got some audio sources. So now I know that when I go here, this audio source array is going to have 3 audio sources. They're going to be audio source 0, 1, and 2. Man, 0, 1, and 2. What the heck? That doesn't tell me anything about what those audio sources are. And later on, I'm going to need to use these, and I don't want to remember 0, 1, and 2, which leads me down to I need an enumeration. Okay, this is the best way to do it. So what I want to do is I want to include the enumeration inside of my utility namespace, util namespace, right? So first, going back to Unity, I'm going to make a new script. So right click, I'm going to make a new script, create new C# script. I'm going to call this so we'll call them sound clips. Sound clip. The sound clip CS file. What it automatically does by default when I create something, this is called sound clip, it makes it mono behavior. I don't need it to be mono behavior. In fact, I want to make this an enumeration, an enum, as opposed to a class. So I'm going to get rid of all this. And in my class, oops, I got rid of the curly brace. In my class, what I want to do, or my enumeration, I want to have the enumerations that make sense to me. So here they are. The first one is the engine sound, all right? Then the thunder sound. Then finally the yay sound. I also want to have, if you notice, as enumeration, what it does is it just numbers these 0, 1, and 2. If I hover over it, this is 0, this is representing 1, and this is representing 2. So this way, it's a friendly name for me to access the sound clips as opposed to remembering 0, 1, and 2. What if I have 10 more sound clips? I don't want to remember any of that stuff. I want there to be a friendly way of knowing what those are. So engine, thunder, and yay, and I'm just using a convention where all the enumerations are all caps, but however I've seen it in different ways as well. Other enumerations I probably want in here are none, but I'm going to set none to -1. So if the enumeration is -1, that means there's no sound clip that's going to play. And also, what I also would like is the number of sound clips I have. So num of clips, let's call it. And what this does is it kind of counts how many active clips there are in my list. For example, I say engine, thunder, yay, that's 3 of them, and the num of clips will tell me how many it is. There's 3 of them. So I don't have to go in here and know how many there are. I can find this out by understanding how many there are in there. One thing I also have to do, because this is a detached class or object, is I want to system.serialize, just like we did with our other classes that we use. For example, our boundary class, we also have the speed class. I want to do the same thing with my enumeration from my sound clip class, or enumeration. Are you with me? So why? You're going to see why this is really cool, all right? So first, yes, this is a good thing. I've got this going, and I want to use this to determine which sound clip I'm playing. Back to Game Controller. So in Game Controller now, here's my audio sources, and what I want to do is near the top, right, I want to determine which sound clip is playing. And so you remember that it's called sound clip. Here's sound clip. Sound clip, and I want to say which sound clip is active. We can call this active sound clip, right? I think I called it default sound clip. when I was doing it for the first section, but I'm just going to call it active sound clip to make it a little different for you guys. Active sound clip. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to take the active sound clip and then create the active audio source up here. Alright, so first of all, what does this do to the editor? What do I get? Why did I do this? Well, this is the really cool part. If I go back to the editor and I look at my game controller now, I have under audio sources so you see I have size, right? And why is this not working? Sometimes what happens is you get this really weird. Yeah, I did. Sometimes also you want to serialize field. I think I have to serialize my field. Oh, it has to be public, sorry. Haha. That's why it's not showing up. It's not public. That would have been good. Because by default, C# is private. So now you can see that it'll come up. There it is. And then look what I get. Instead of like another field, I get a pull down, right? Where it says none, engine, thunder, yay, and so on, right? Which is way cooler than deciding what it is. So I want to make my engine sound play first, right? So when this is shown, whatever I choose here, that's the sound that's going to play and loop in this scene. Okay, and I can choose whatever else I want. And if I have other scenes, like later on, if I decide to have music or whatever, that scene, that sound could be the thing that's in the background that's looping. So I need to configure this in the script now. So here I've done that. I've created a little enumeration. In my start method, I want to put in some information about this. So what I want to say is, cool, let's set up some kind of audio source that I'm going to play, and I could literally just, I mean, I have an active audio source. Let's just make it happen. So again, in my start scene, I want to say that I have an audio source. Here's my audio source that I'm going to call the active audio source. Right, here's my active audio source. And I'm going to make that equal to audio sources. So that's the array, right? And I'm going to pass in my active sound clip. Active sound clip. But I can't really do this. So this is a reference that I'm creating. I'm saying, hey, make it something called an active audio source, and I want to take my audio source array where I store them. That's where they're actually stored. Each audio source is stored in there. And I want to activate it with this like nice and friendly active audio source enumeration, whatever I choose. But I can't do this because the enumeration is not an integer, which means I've got to cast this as an integer. And now that's happier, right? Once I've done this and I've cast it as an integer, I can say something like active audio source dot, and then again, play on awake is equal to true. I want to turn that on. I also want to say that active audio source loop is also true, so I want to loop this thing. And then finally, what I want to say is active audio source dot play, so I can play the loop. Okay, so those three things will make my active audio source play. Are you with me? So again, I got the enumeration, I've chosen what I want to play, and it's whatever I choose is going to play. Okay? So let's try this out. Still some flaws in this, we'll correct. And now when I play it, we should hear the engine sound. Let's try this out. It does. And it's a little loud. I don't like it. So what you can do is you can modify some aspects of it. For example, I think the volume for my engine sound probably should be about half. So you can actually put a value in here. You can also configure this programmatically. So if I put like my audio source dot volume, you can change that. In fact, why don't we do that to make sure it's half, because that may be moved or changed. So I can say that active audio source dot volume, right, and again is equal to like 0.5f. You can do that. So that's going to create because that is a floating point number. 0.5f gives it half or 50% of the sound. From 0, it's normalized from 0 to 1, where 1 is 100%. All right, so that's good, and that works. But what if I press none? None gives it a -1. -1 does not compute with an array, which would crash my code. So I don't want that to happen. which means I got to test for it. So I got to say that, well, what if it's not -1, and what if it's not 3? Because 3 is like number of sources. I know how many sources there are, and that can't work either. So I'm going to say something like if, I'll put it in brackets. I'm going to use an and. It's going to do. I need to both things to be correct. I'm going to say if my active sound clip, right? My active sound clip dot, and again, equals to, or you can say that it's double, not equal to is what I want, not equals to my sound clip dot none, right? Because that could be a case. So active sound clip is actually this object that I've created that's going to hold the enumeration, right? And if it's none, if it's set to none, well then don't crash my code, please, right? And then otherwise, if it's my active sound clip is not equal to number of sound clip dot number of clips. If it's something like this, one of these two, that will crash my code. I don't want that to happen. So what I want to do is only if those two conditions are not true, then you can do this. So it prevents me from doing that. And this way now, if I go back to the editor and if I say, okay, well, you know what, my game controller, I want this to be none. I want to turn my sound off for testing. I can do that. I can set it to none and then press play, and then we're good to go. Or if I want to turn this to, again, like we said before, if I want to put this to engine, then I can make it play and I can test that sound. Or if I want to make it to the thunder sound, I should be able to choose any of those things, and then, right? Shh. And then the last one, you're right. The last one is yay. The yay sound is going to say yay, right?
Yay.
Right?
Yay.
Right.
Yay. Yay.
Whatever it is, I can do whatever I want. I know, it's pretty funny. I can do whatever I want there, and it's going to play any of the clips that I want, and if I want other ones later on, I can do that too. But if I press none, none will allow me to do whatever I want. For now, we're going to leave it at engine. Clear? So that's what the power of enumerations are. Enumerations are really cool because they make it super easy for you as a developer to kind of decide which one, and then not care to remember any of those things, as long as, and this is the proviso, that you have aligned these in the right order. And this is where later on, not this tutorial, but the next tutorial when we do our platformer, we'll do more programmatic finding of stuff as opposed to me dragging and dropping, which is not as good overall. Although it's very quick, and for prototyping it's fine. Okay, so cool, we've got our sounds, that's excellent. Now that I have these, I want to be able to activate them, right? I mean, I have these sounds, right? I've created something called audio sources. I should then, in my player controller, be able to go down here and say, hey, game controller, play this audio source when I run over an island. Hey, game controller, play this audio source when I run over a cloud, right? In order for me to do that, I need to make a reference to the game controller here inside the player controller. So in the player controller, I'm going to create a public reference to my game controller. And my game controller, I'm going to call this game controller. There we go. So my game controller now, I want to make it so I can do this, but it's going to be pretty long. You're going to see what it's going to look like. It's going to look something like this. Game controller dot, audio sources, and then in brackets, sound clip dot thunder, and then dot play. And what I want to do, of course, is convert this thing from an enum to an int, and it's going to look pretty big and ugly like this, which I'm totally happy with. I understand it, but from a usability later on, I think this is probably a little bit too long. So I want to take this idea and create a little bit of an alias. So down here, I'm going to make a couple of private variables. So here are some private instance variables. And one of these private variables is going to be called the thunder sound. So we'll call this underscore thunder sound, which is going to be of type audio source underscore thunder sound. And also we make another one, private audio source. I'm using the underscore to denote that it's private. Yay sound. Okay, there we go. And then in the start function, I can say that, well, thunder sound is equal to this, and yay sound, well, that's equal to yay. Okay? So these are just little shortcuts, if you will. So I don't have to put in like gamecontroller.audiosources.soundclip.thunder. It's too much, right? Still clear, but you know, it might be easier if we did this, right? So I say cloud, when I hit the cloud, then make the thunder sound. Thunder sound dot play. Play. Right? With a capital P. And if I hit the island, then I want to say that yay sound dot play. Okay? Nice and easy, and it's very descriptive. You can see what's happening here. Questions around this? Alright, let's run it and see how it works. If it works. So again, we got our background sound, and then we hit a cloud, and what the? It's not making a sound at all. How come? Well, let's check the console. Usually that's a good indicator of what's happening. And it says that we've got a null reference here. Oh yeah, I know exactly what the problem is. In my player controller, I never made a reference to my my game controller, which is what I need. I can't access my game controller unless I make a reference to it, so I'm going to take my game controller from my hierarchy and drag and drop. And that should fix the problem. Now remember what we talked about. This is like not great because exactly this problem. It should find the game controller by itself, and we can do that later. So again, if I go into it, if I hit, yay, it'll make a yay sound. Right? The yay, thunder sound works. Yay. Right? And you can see that, you know, we almost have a bit of a ground of a game here. And so we have the beginnings of feedback for the player. So sounds are done. So let's put this in here in Colab. I'll say collision detection and sound effects, right? Because that's what we kind of did. Push the Colab, and we have that part right there. Excellente. We can continue. But really, what I need here in my game is I want a way of creating a scoreboard for my game, right? Again, a couple ways we can do this. I can create a scoreboard manager. I can create a scoreboard section in my game controller, right? I can score, you know, I can create a canvas, and the canvas can control everything. It's really up to you how you want to set this up. Me, I'm going to try and keep it simple for this demo, and I'm going to put the scoreboard manager inside of the game controller, right? So again, game controller is going to be my main access, but for me to do this, I want to create a canvas first that's going to house my game controller. That's going to show my score. So again, I'm right clicking here and I'm going to add a new UI object. I'm not going to use Text Mesh Pro this time around. I'm going to wait for the platformer example. I'm just going to use simple text objects. So text, here it is. Notice what it does is it creates a canvas and a text object where I can show my text, but it's really been abstracted out, and you can see that by default we have a new text that is like way over here, and it's really massive. It's more difficult to work, I find, especially in 2D when you're working like this. I mean, actually I find it difficult to work in general like this, so I like to have my canvas, although it's a screen space overlay, I want to change my canvas from a screen space overlay to a screen space camera. When I do that, I need a reference to the main camera object right here. And what this does is it changes my overlay to be right here. However, if you're going to notice something, that my camera only shows a distance of up to 10 meters on the far plane. However, my screen space overlay has a plane distance of 100, which means it's out of camera range. I want to bring back that back in. So I'm going to change this to 10, which brings back my text down here. And what I want to do here is I want to change that text for now to a yellow color, because it's, you know, yellow on blue, it looks a little nicer than black on blue, that's for sure. There it is. But it's pretty ugly, this text, right? I mean, it's not really according to our game. We can fix that. We can do better, because I have given you guys a font set called Doc51. We can drag and drop this Doc51 font onto the font of my text object inside the canvas, like so, which changes the font to make it nicer looking. I don't think this is quite big enough. Let's make this something like 20. And let's change what it says. So this is we'll call this the lives label. Lives label. And this should be lives, and maybe I'm going to have, like, let's say maybe 100 lives max. So lives, and then say 999, 100. And we're going to put this label so that it appears in the top left corner somewhere of the screen. And again, I'm just eyeballing it for now. We could further do this later. I also want to make this in the middle of the label. That's what this option does. This also does the bottom, top, right? I don't want to make it so it's the center, because that means every time the lives change, it'll recenter itself. I don't want that. Or to the right, all right? Don't prefer that either. I want it to grow from the left. That's why I make it left justified. Okay? So that's the lives label. And if you don't think this is big enough, we can certainly make it better or bigger later. Cool? So that's lives label. All right. I want to duplicate this now and make a score label, and I want to put it on the other side. So again, I want to take this lives label, Control D to duplicate, rename it as score label. There we are. And then drag this across to this other side. And notice it gives me some control lines or some guidelines. So I can do this. I can put it right on the sides, approximately over here. I can set it up later on so it's exact, but for now, eyeballing it's fine. And what I want to do is in my score label, I want to put in score, and then I want maybe a score of 10,000 or something. So let's do 99999. And that gives me enough room. It looks like it's enough room for 10,000. You know what? Thinking about this again, I don't think 20 is the right size. Let's make it so that both those labels are 24. I think it might be better. And now we can see that it's a little bit sharper in terms of how big it is. I'm happy with that. And how does it look on my game? It looks like this. This is the prototype of what it would look like in game. Awesome. Great. So that's the lives label and the score label. And what I wanted to do is this. When I play the game, when I get a score, I want to be able to change the lives label and score label on the fly. I don't want to use events. I don't want to use the update function. Okay? I want to use properties. And we can do that. This is, C# properties 101 that we're going to use. And we're going to see how this works. So let's set up this properties first inside of my game controller. So, game controller, I need a couple things to do. One, I'm going to create a score section, a scoreboard section in my game controller. So again, we have audio sources. Again, I could have made this an audio manager, a whole other script just to do audio management. I didn't. I put it inside of my game controller. I'm going to make another header. We're going to call this the scoreboard. So scoreboard. And under scoreboard, I want a couple things. One, I want now hear me out this one. I want private instance variables here, right? So I want a private instance variable that's an integer, which I'm going to call lives. And a private integer for score. However, I want them to appear for troubleshooting purposes. I want these to appear on my editor. So I'm going to say serialize field. Serialize field, it'll even show private data members inside your editor, which is kind of a cool feature. So I can still keep them private, but still view them if I want to. Cool. Now remember how object-oriented programming uses data hiding, so we use public properties and private instance variables. And a lot of students, when they first start off learning about public properties, they're like, but why? Getter and setter, but who needs them? Here, I'm going to show you the real reason why you want to use getters and setters. And they're not just for here, but for other things as well. So again, you can notice I have two private instance variables, lives and score. I'm just using the underscore to denote private. And I'm going to use prop, which is the shortcut for property in Visual Studio. I'm going to double tab and then create my property. So it's still going to be integer, but my first property is going to be called lives, capital L. And instead of having get set, I'm actually going to make my own getters and setters. So my first getter that I'm going to make is like this. It's going to return underscore lives. That's my getter. And my setter, I'm going to set lives, right, for now, to equal to value, which is the default keyword. And this is equivalent to get set, but I'm going to change this later on. So that's the public properties. So these are public properties. By the way, if you were thinking, why don't I just make properties? Why don't I just make public int lives available on the editor? Guess what? Public properties, or properties in general, are not available. They're not compatible with the editor. You can never see a property. You can see public or private instances, but never a property like this. So this is unfortunate, but it's the way it is. So public properties. Let's make one more, the other one, which is score. So again, it's prop, tab tab. It's an integer. We're going to call this score with a capital S. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make the getter our standard getter, which is return underscore score. But the setter is where all the magic's going to happen later on. Underscore score equals to value. There we go. So we've got a way of setting the score and a way of setting the lives, but we're only going to show lives and score here. So now that we've set this up in Game Controller, in my player controller, then when I collide with a cloud or an island, I want to say, hey, Game Controller, set the score to blah blah. Now there's a couple ways we can do this. I can have a set score and set lives property. I could do that, or method. I could do that. But I have properties. I'm using properties. I can use the get accessor or the set mutator, right, to do whatever I need to do. So let's go back to this. So in my cloud, I can say that, okay, hey, Game Controller, set the property for lives, or lives, I want to minus equal to 1. I can do that, right? And then I can also say, hey, Game Controller, set the property for score plus equals to 100. Every time I hit an island, I want to get 100 points. That's what this is saying. Let's see if this is going to work. And the way we can see this is right in the editor. All right, so again, it's not going to modify the labels yet. First, let's do the editor, one step at a time. So going back to this, if I press play, watch the lives and score, you can see that the lives go down to -1. I get a score if I want to, right? 200, right? And I'm getting in minus territory here. Okay, that's interesting. Well, I want to start with 5 lives and 0 score. So what I can do here is I can go back to my Game Controller, and inside my start, I can sit there and say something like my lives, notice I'm using capital L, this is key, is equal to 5. And my score is equal to 0. Okay, cool. So I'll set this up by default. Now here's where the magic happens. I want references to my labels, my score label and my lives label. Let's get those references. So again, public references, public. So again, these are labels, so these are text objects, and I can't kind of put in text objects like this, or references to text objects, unless I use a using statement. So using Unity Engine .ui, I need to put that in there. If I put using Unity Engine .ui, I have access to them. So I can do something like public text, see that comes up now, text, and it will be the lives label. We'll use it lowercase, lives label. And my public text lowercase score label. And now that I have those, again, I'm using drag and drop for connections for this tutorial. I'm going to go back to here, and inside my game controller, you can see that there's a couple spaces now, live label and score label, and I can simply pull them from the canvas. So here's my live label, and here's my score label, and I have a connection now from the game controller to the canvas objects. All right? Great. So now that I've done this, this is where the magic happens, my friends. I'm going to go into my setter for my lives label, and I'm going to say when I set lives, also update the label. Here we go. So then I can say lives label dot text is equal to, again, it's going to say something like lives plus underscore lives dot toString. And what this is going to do is it's going to convert the number, whatever how many lives I have, to a string and add it to this, and it's going to set the text of my lives label immediately to this. It's going to happen every single time I change the value, right? I don't need some kind of like event handler. I don't need to put this on update. I don't have to check for this all the time. It's only when it happens. I send a signal, a message from my player controller to my games controller, and then bam, it's going to happen. So here I'll do it again for score. So again, it's score label dot text is equal to score. So that's what it's going to look like. Plus underscore score dot toString. And this, my friends, will do everything we need to make it work. And this is where public properties are amazing. And I don't just do this for this. You know, you can use it in C# code in other circumstances where you want to do something. When you're getting something you want to record, you want to log that someone's accessing data, you can do that with your get accessor. You want to log when someone's setting data, you can do that with your set mutator, right? And you can do that every single time. So now what's the effect on the game? Well, it's a beautiful thing. Watch. Just by doing that, you have this. So I lost lives, I got some score, right? Lost more lives. I'm a -2. Here's something. Let's make sure that these things, my score, is happening, and my UI is floats above everything else. And right now it's not. And I can tell you why. Because when I look at my canvas, I can see that the order and layer is 0. That can't be, guys. It's got to be higher above everything else. And to ensure that that's going to happen, let's put order and layer 10, which is going to make sure that all my UI floats way above everything else. Okay? User interface, done. Scoreboard for my main level, right? However, if you noticed, there's a problem, right? The problem that I had was when my lives went down to 0 or negative, it just kept going. So now this is a good case. I have enough information to give, to push this thing to move it to another scene. I can create other scenes that as soon as my lives go to 0, it goes to that new scene. An example would be an end scene where we can say something like, okay, cool, do you want to play again? Game over, do you want to play again? So now we're talking about scene management, but before we get there, we're going to put this up on Colab and on GitHub. So we're going to say something like initial version of scoreboard, right? So I'll put this up to publish this on Colab. So if I was working with somebody else, they would get my changes right away. That's what Colab is really good for. Okay, now I'm going to shut this down. Remember, whenever we do anything with GitHub, what we want to do is we want to shut everything down. I'm going to use command line here. So I'm going to bring up my command line, and then I'm going to go to my Unity projects. So again, I know my Unity projects for now are under my desktop. And your project is lesson 2B. That's where we're starting with. I'm going to say CD space in my command line. I'm going to drag and drop my my folder from my Unity project onto the command line, which gives me the exact path I need. I'm going to press enter. CD means change directory. I'm in that directory. This is the way to do it by command line. I'm going to say this. Well, things. I'm going to say git add dot. This is the default commands. git add dot adds all of the objects that I've changed to the staging area. So it staged everything, right? Now the next one, git commit minus m for message, and then what I want to do is talk about what I did. So I actually added scoreboard. Okay, and then it kind of selects all the objects that I put on the staging area and says these are the objects that I'm going to send to GitHub or for this commit. And then I'm going to say git push. And what git push is going to do is it's going to connect to my remote and it's going to send everything to GitHub. So now you should have everything up on GitHub, anything I've done so far. Notice I had to close Unity down. Some people make the mistake of keeping Unity open. That would be bad because there's meta files that are locked that are being used by Unity, and if you try and put some of those up on GitHub, they won't work. And what's going to happen is you'll have a broken project on GitHub. When someone tries to use it, some assets will be missing, like missing prefabs, and that's the bane of people who are developing with Unity. All right, so now that we've done that, we're ready to move on to the next part, which is moving from one scene to the next. All right, so let's go back into this. So far we've been working within one scene, main. But what I want to do is I want to develop it so I can move from one scene to the next scene. I want to go like this: start scene, my place scene, my end scene. Now in your case, you might have something like this: start scene, your tutorial scene, level 1, level 2, boss level, final level, and some kind of other, or maybe some other kind of things in between. You might have some kind of initial warm-up scene where it's easy to do stuff. That's your tutorial. Then you have a transition scene to something else. You can have transitions, lots and lots of other stuff that you want. You can have menus, you can have settings, you can have all kinds of stuff can be stored in scenes for your user interface or for your game. So how do you move from one scene to the other? First of all, we need to have scenes to move to. So I'm going to go to scenes. Right now I have main. That's cool. I want to copy this scene because it has a lot of information I want to reuse, but there's some stuff we need to do differently. One, I have my canvas object. I always want to have my canvas object. That's for sure. And my event system. So those two things I always want to have. Canvas and event system. So I want to create a prefab for this, right? This is one thing I want to do. So my canvas needs to be a prefab. One thing, notice that my canvas and my event system are separate, right? But I want to bring this in. My canvas is going to be brought in. So in my prefabs, I'm going to drag and drop my canvas. We're going to update this as we go. There's my canvas. Event system we won't prefab because there's nothing special about it. Not yet. So far what we have is a standard event system. Okay, that's in here. So we can leave that alone. Okay, now that we have an event system and my canvas has been prefabbed, I think I'm ready to go with what I'm doing. One thing that also I want to do is my game controller. See my game controller? I want to prefab that too, right? Because I have some set up for this that I want to keep from one scene to the next. So I'm going to again prefab that one. This is my game controller. So now that I have most objects prefabbed in the scene, this is a kind of a great state to be in. Okay? Why is it a great state to be in? Because if I make a push to collab, those prefabbed examples won't be destroyed. This is a good thing if I'm working with somebody else. Okay, good. Now I'm going to copy my scene. So I'm going to go back to my scene, and instead of making a brand new scene, I have a lot of stuff I want to reuse. So let's Control D, which is copy, and I'm going to start with my start scene. So I'm going to just go here. This is the beginning. We're going to come back and forth a little bit here. So I'm going to start with my start scene. I'm going to call it start. Now in order for me to go from start to main, both scenes have to be registered. And what I mean by that is under File, Build Settings, you're going to have this situation where you can see that my default build type is WebGL. That's fine. But here I have my main scene, but I have nothing to do with my start scene. So I'm going to pull my start scene into this build, and I want to drag and drop these things so that I can set up the order. So I want my start scene to start first, then my main scene. Okay. Notice they also have a index 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever else I have. Any other scenes are going to be indexed here. If I don't do this, Scene Manager, which is what we're going to use next, is not going to know how to go from one scene to the other. You need to reference your scenes here. Alright, we'll save this. We'll go back to my start scene now. I'm in my start scene. There we go. It looks the exact same. However, here's some problems. One, Canvas and Game Controller seem to have lost their prefab-ness. I don't know if you noticed that. See that? Look, Canvas. Canvas is not a prefab anymore. And so is Game Controller. Game Controller, not a prefab. We can make it a prefab by doing the following. Sometimes you get this problem. Go to prefabs, and you can drag and drop your Game Controller right on top of your other one, like this, which means replace anywhere. And the same thing goes with my canvas. I can drag and drop my canvas right on top of my other one. And now you have prefabs in these ones, as well as in, if I go back to my scenes, my main looks the same. So this main, this is start. I want to do this because I need to have prefabs in here, and I don't want to drag and drop. Because once I drag and drop, I have to do all those connections again. Remember, we're in that state. We're not in a state where the prefabs discover themselves. We're not there yet. All right? So, going back to this then, I have enough to get me going. Now, here's what I don't want. When I'm in my start state, I don't want my lives or my score to show, because I don't have lives and score yet. Right? And I also don't need a player object. So let's get rid of them. So in my start scene, my player object does not exist, right? Because you can't play. I'm not ready to play yet. However, I do want to show my ocean moving, my clouds and my island, almost like a preview of what's happening in the background. Those things I do want. Great. So I don't want my score and I don't want my lives. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on these on my canvas, and I'm going to just take my lives and my score, and just for now, I'm going to untag them so that you don't see them, but they're there. I'm never going to delete anything from my canvas. I'm going to have one canvas prefab that I'm going to carry forward from one scene to the next. Eventually, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to have one game controller that's going to live from one scene to the next. Okay, cool. So what do I want on my canvas? Well, I was hasty. I want to bring one of these back. I want to Control D to copy, right? So I want to take this one, Control D it, which makes a copy of this one. I want to put this one to sleep again, and then take this one, rename it, and I'm going to call this the start label. Start label is going to say like mail pilot, like, you know, or play mail pilot or whatever, like the old games used to do. So it's going to be something like in here. Notice when I dragged, I got all these guides, which is really cool. So I want to make this say something different. It's going to say mail pilot, except it's going to be like massive. It won't be like that small. It'll be something like 80, right? Mail pilot. Let's see what that looks like. Like that big, I'm talking about. And let's just make it a little bigger. We're also going to make it centered. And we're going to take this mail pilot label. We're going to use our guides. It snaps us to guides here. There we go. And we're going to bring it somewhere down here. So that's what it's going to look like, mail pilot, right? There it is. Notice there's not going to be any labels here on the side, right? And I need a button. The button is going to be the start button, right? So I'm going to bring a button in here too. I'm going to right click on my canvas. I'm going to bring in a new UI button. So here's the button. And it's a pretty boring button. I'm going to bring it down kind of around here. There it is. Now this is kind of cool. I don't have to accept this button as it is. In fact, I have my own buttons that I gave you guys. Under textures, you can see that there's some buttons. One of them is the start button, one is the restart button. Okay? So I'm going to use my start button because I made it. Not because it's any good, by the way. Just because I made it. Alright? And I want to replace the image that's here with that image. So a couple things. One, if I'm going to use an image button, I don't need text. So let's get rid of this. So now it's like empty. Just the image in the background. And then I can replace the button. The image is right here, which is a UI sprite. I can replace it with whatever sprite I want. Even a plane if I want. Like, I can replace it with a plane. It's weird, but I could. But I really want this one. I want the start button. Now it's a little skewed because by default, it's going to take the shape of whatever the original button was. However, you can set it back to native by clicking set to native size right here, which sets up my button in the right ratio. So now I have my mail pilot and my button. And if I go to my game, the preview kind of looks like this. Not bad. I'm pretty good with this. So when I click on my start button, it's going to take me to my main scene. That's what I want. But I got to set that up. So how do I set it up? Now I need another script. Now this is an event type script. So when I press my start button, my scene manager is going to change me from this current scene to the next scene, which I've already defined as main. Where do I put that script? Now there's a couple of options here. I could have everything in the game controller. So UI would be controlled in the game controller. Or I could have something in somewhere else. For me, for now, again, remember we talked about this? I'm just going to put everything in the game controller for today. But next time we do this, I will separate this out into their own managers. You'll have a much different hierarchy than we have today. So I'm going to go back to my game controller. I did this differently earlier today. I actually put it in as another file. I want another area called UI, so scene game objects, audio sources, scoreboard, and I want like UI down in here. Okay? So let's do this. So again, I'm going to go to my game controller script. Just like I did before, I'm going to create a new header when this thing comes up. So here's my header. This is still loading. I'm a little faster than Visual Studio right now. There we go. And I'm going to come into here. I'm going to put another header called UI control, right? And in my UI control header, I want the following. I want to have access to my button for now. Okay? So I'm going to create a reference to my button. In fact, I want to have references to everything. I have already references to my lives label and my score label, right? But instead of just having references to those things, I also want to have reference to my button. So here's what I want to do. In my button, I want to be able to enable and disable my button because not all scenes are going to need my my start label or my button. So here in my UI control, I just want to make these game objects, not text. I'm not going to do anything with them. I'm not going to change what they say inside. I just want to activate them or deactivate them, right? So the first thing is my start label. So I'm going to say public game object start label. And I want a public game object start button. There we go. Start label, start button. Excellent. Awesome. So now that I have those back into Unity, you can see that in the game controller, I'm going to get another section called UI control. And I want to drag and drop my start label inside here and my start button inside here. There we go. And now I have references to those two things. Great. Down in the bottom, I'm going to make another event handler. So these are all my event handlers. The event handler is going to be public, has to be public, returns void, must return void, and usually by convention you call it on something. So for example, on start button click. That's your own name, whatever you want to make it. Alright, so when the start button is clicked, what I want to happen is it's going to move from one scene to the next scene. That's what I want it to do. So again, if I go up to the top, there's something else I'm missing now. I've got my Unity engine, I've got my Unity engine UI, and the next thing I need to do is using Unity engine. Unity engine, I'll be okay. Dot scene. Cool. So I've got this done, but I'm still not done. I got to go back to my UI. So here I've got my script happening, right? And what I want to do is I want to set it up so that in my button, the button itself, if I scroll down, I'll collapse these two for now. If I scroll down, you can see that there's an area that says on click. That's the default event for a button. If I click this plus object, I don't know if you guys can see this, plus, then it gives me an option to determine which object is the one that I want to, I'm going to be using as a script source. And that's just game controller, which is actually this object itself, right? Or the game controller is the object. So I'm going to take the game controller, a reference to the game controller, drag and drop it, which now gives the button an understanding of which object is going to control it, the game controller object. Under function, I need to choose that function, and I'm going to look at game controller, and then the name of the function I chose, which is onStartButtonClick. So this onStartButtonClick is the one I defined, but it appears here because I dragged and dropped the game controller on the button. Yay, cool. So when I click on the button, it's going to start my game. Excellent. Let's see if this works. So again, I'm going to press play. I should be in the start scene, and the start scene is now going to look like this. Oh man, I don't want that sound to play. In fact, I want to control what's in my scene depending on what scene is loaded. Remember, scene management. So now I want to say, when the scene loads that is called start, set the sound to none. Remember the little enumeration? So let's do that in my game controller. Now there's a lot of moving parts here, so I'm going to go review this after, okay? Just bear with me. So again, going up to the top. So yes, I'm sending all this stuff in my game controller, but inside my start, I've got lives and score, but I also want to set up my scene. I want to start thinking about if my scene is a certain scene. And I can do that by the following. I can say that, alright, let's do a switch statement. And depending on this current scene that's loaded, so I'm going to say scene manager dot get current scene or get active scene. If that, right, depending on what that is, dot name, the name of my active scene, I can switch. I can create a scene. I can change the objects in my scene. So one thing that I did, if you notice, is I disabled my lives label and my score label, but I don't want to do this manually. I want it to be done programmatically. So that means that when my scene is called main or start, let's try this. So case start, if it's a start scene, then I want to do something. If it is the main scene, then I want to do something. We're also going to have some scene called the end scene, then I want to do something else. Right? We don't have the end scene yet. We will. In my start scene, though, I want to disable my score label and my lives label. So I'm going to say something like this. Score label dot enabled is equal to false. Score lives label dot enabled is equal to false. So that's only for UI objects. I have to enable or disable them, right? So that's the first thing. However, when I'm in main, I don't want to disable these, but I do want to disable my start label. Because I've made my start label a game object, I actually have to set active to false, which is much better. And I can do the same thing for my start button. You know, thinking about the end, I definitely want my end label not to have a start label or a start button. So let's do the same thing there. I don't have an end scene yet. And I also want to do score label and lives label. I want to turn those off too. Because, you know, there won't be score label and lives label in my end scene. Okay, makes sense? So far, this is kind of a, I'm creating settings. So when I move from one scene to the other, certain things turn on and off. Now, I don't have to do this. I can have a canvas that's different for every scene. But I'm choosing to do it this way. Here's something else I want to do. I want to be able to control the sound, the background sound, depending on the scene that I'm on. I know that the game object has access to that, the game controller. And that's the stuff I just did down here, which is my active sound clip, right? So I want to set the active sound clip to whatever I want. So I want to say that in the start scene, my active sound clip is equal to sound clip dot none. I don't want to have a sound. And inside the main scene, my active sound clip is the engine sound. And in the end scene, I want to make my active sound clip none again. So I want to turn off the sound in the beginning and the end, and in my engine, I want to turn that on. So why did I do this? Because it doesn't matter which is the active sound clip, right? It'll turn it on, play on awake, it'll loop it, and it'll set the volume to 0.5, whatever that happens to be. So if I make other music or whatever, I can do that. So this little thing here, this little baby right here, is what it does is it basically just does, it doesn't do the scene switching, but it detects which scene it's in, and depending on what the scene is, it sets certain properties for the scene. Okay, let's see if the first one works. So the start scene works. So I'm going to disable my score label and live label and set the active sound clip to none, which means we should not hear the engine sound. Let's see if that works. So play. Good to go. No sound clip, and we don't have those labels. They're not on. You can see that everything is floating up way above the clouds, and when I click start, it should move us to the next scene. Here's something that did happen that I didn't expect. I have a bit of a failure here when it comes to this one. Well, the reason why this is happening is because I've modified my game controller and it doesn't know some stuff. It doesn't understand how to do some things. It says the variable start label of game controller, it says, has not been assigned, and of course it cannot be assigned in the play scene because it doesn't exist in the play scene. Why? Because we've updated the canvas. Let's update the canvas prefab so that even the main scene has the same stuff. So again, I'm going to go over to overrides, and I'm going to choose apply all, and when I do that, these changes to the prefab have applied to all my scenes. So I have one canvas that I'm reusing in my main scene as well. Let's try this out now. So again, I'm going to run this thing. Again, no labels. I click start, and we still have this problem. So it says, okay, unassigned, that's fine. Let's also look at the game controller. So game controller is here, right? We have a button. We have a start label. Right, here's my start label. But what about, we have the canvas item, right? So where would be the problem? I mean, it tells me what the issue is. It says like there's an error. It says like the unassigned reference exception. You probably need to assign the start label variable of the game controller scripts somewhere. I do have them here. It shows that I have them here, but this is the start scene. We have to move to the main scene to check out what's going on there. So I'm going to go to the main scene, and if I look at the game controller, you can see that I have a problem here. Yeah.
Does the name for start label and canvas need to be the same as in the code? Like capital?
No. So now you can see that the canvas has start label and start button. I'm just going to drag and drop these here. Later on, we won't need to do this because we can make the game controller live between scenes by don't destroy on load. But for now, we'll just do this, and that will fix the problem. And if I go back to scenes, and if I press play, so again we see that the scene is playing. I click start. Now we have our sound. We don't have a state to take us to the third level yet, right? Because we don't have an end scene yet. Let's make that end scene. Alright, so now that we've set up stuff in my start scene, I can completely copy the start scene, which is going to operate in the same way onto the end scene. So again, I'm going to click start scene. I'm going to press Control D, which is going to duplicate it and make start 1. Let's rename this thing to end. One thing I need to do to make the end scene happen is I need to change the file build settings, and I need to add the end scene in here. I couldn't do it before because I didn't have it, but now I do. And here it is, start, main, end. Those are all the scenes that are going to be built when we do our WebGL build. Good? Now that we have this, let's go to the end scene. So now the end scene is a little different. It's not going to need mail pilot on, or lives, or this, or start. All this stuff is going to be turned off. And as you can see, score label, lives label, start button, and active sound clip is none. These are all off, right? However, I need new things. So in my canvas, if I go to score label, start label. Let's copy start label and the start button, and I'm going to change those things to the end label and the restart button. So again, I'm going to copy paste. So Control D. Start label becomes end label. We could also call it game over label, right? And this is going to just say game over. Don't worry about what it says here, because remember that it won't show up anyway. But for now, we'll just turn it off so we can see, so we can work with this. So we know that the game end label is going to be slightly bigger. So here's my end label. So we can fill game over. We're also going to center this one. There we go. Again, I'm just eyeballing it here. I could get exact values later on. And I want to change the button. First of all, let's rename this button. Rename. I want to change this to start button. Again, I have to fix this prefab. Remember, I've changed the prefab. I'm changing it again. I'm adding new stuff to it. The little plus next to it says this is the changes that I made, right? Okay, I'm going to add another one. I'm going to go back into the start button. I'm going to Control D, which is going to copy the start button. And then I'm going to hide the original start button and change this to restart button. Restart button. Cool. Well, I don't want it to say start. It should say restart. So I can choose the restart image, right? So again, if I go to the image, I can choose restart, right? So that's the exact same button, but just different. One thing to note is because I copied the button, so too did I copy the event. And I need typically a different event handler. However, I'm just going to state this. The start button takes you to main, and the restart button will take you back to main. So I could probably use the same event handler because they're doing the exact same scene. However, I want to use another one because maybe in the future it won't be main. Maybe I'll have another button that takes me to the main menu, which is the start menu. So for now I'm going to leave two different events doing the same thing, and only just to create a placeholder event so I can use it later on. Okay. Alright, so let's go back. So I've got these two new buttons, and what I want to do is I want to create another event in the game controller script. So game controller at the bottom, and you can see I want to make another public event. We're going to call this on restart button click. We don't know what that's doing yet. For now though, we're going to make it so that it's exactly the same. It's just going to load the main scene again. The great thing about this is a great way to check to make sure that everything is as it should be. Going back to this now, my restart button, if I click onto it, instead of me choosing the on start button click event, I'm going to choose the on restart button click event. It's exactly the same for now, but it's going to work. So these are cool. So I have two new buttons. I have two new things, the restart button and the end label. Okay, so back to this. Do I really need a restart button and an end label in my start scene? No, but I need to be able to control those. And in order for me to do that, I have to get references to them. So again, for me, I'm just doing it the old way. So public game object, and we're going to call this the end label, and public game object restart button. There we go. So those two new things. Now I have to make references to them in game controller. So back in game controller, I have two new objects to make references to. One of them is the end label, and one of them is the restart button. Excellent. Back to this, I'm going to go scroll down to this part. This is my scene switcher, right? And what I want to do here with my scene switcher is I want to kind of talk about the different buttons. So I want the end label and the restart button to be here, but nowhere else. So again, I'm just going to say that. I'm going to say that the end label dot set active is going to be false inside the main area. We don't want to ever see that. And also the restart button dot set active is also going to be false. Okay, I want to take these two lines, because I know I'm going to copy these two things and put them up here. So I don't want them to be available in my start. And there you have it. So all I'm doing is configuring each scene. Depending on which scene it is, I configure them and I turn things in the canvas on and off. That's all I'm doing. Now, do I have to do this? No. I don't have to do this at all. I can have separate canvas items for each scene. I can have separate game controllers. I can have everything separate and redundant. I can do that if I want. And there's nothing that tells you have to do it this way. But I think this is pretty good because you can reuse the same canvas over and over again and turn things on and off. And this gives you a hint if you have multiple scenes with similar assets that you can turn things off and on in your scenes depending on which scene it is. That's how you do it, which I've been asked to show you. Alright, cool. So now that we have this, let's update my prefab for my canvas. So again, I'm going to go to my canvas prefab. I'm going to go to overrides. I'm going to click apply all. That updates the prefabs for there. My game controller, I don't really have any overrides, but I'm going to apply them all anyway just in case things are changed. Once I've done this, I'm going to save my end scene. Right? I definitely want these ones, I forgot, these ones should be on. I better update the prefab again. So save, right? So I'm going to go back to my canvas and update the prefab. That's definitely going to be there. So now that I have this, let's check that this is the exact same in the other scenes before I move on. So scenes, so I go to start. Yes, save. What does my canvas look like in my scene, and what does my game controller look like? Okay, game controller is missing stuff. The end label and restart label is not being pointed to, so I'm going to do that. End label, and this is where I would make them happen automatically in a future version of our game demo. Save. And I also want to do the same thing in my main scene. So main scene. Again, if I take a look at my game controller, I'm missing those two. I'm going to go down in here and go to my end label and my restart button. There we go. Cool. So now if I go to my start scene, everything should work exactly as it's supposed to work. Except for what happens when I die. So when I die, when the actual plane crashes with the clouds, it goes into those killer clouds. They must have some kind of radiation or some kind of, I don't know, hidden enemy to kill the plane. But when it hits the clouds, when it goes to 0 or less than 0 lives, it should switch to the end scene, or we're never going to see the end scene. So how do I do that? Well, and this is where again I say to you, it's an amazing time when we have we're using structures that we've learned in C#, right, to do it. So I'm going to go use my getters and setters again. So in my getters and setters, which are up here, I'm going to say that when my lives reaches a 0 or less than 0, so if lives is less than or equal to 0, so my lives value, right, then I want to use my scene manager to load scene the end. And that should move us from the main scene to the end scene. And then when you click restart, it goes from the end scene to the main scene. And it'll keep going back and forth in this current version of our code. Let's try this out and see if it works. So play mail pilot, click start, we play, we get some points, we die, game over, right? We failed, right? And now we press restart, we play again.
Yay.
And we're dead again. Okay, questions around this. So this is scene switching. I have multiple scenes. I have my start scene, my main scene, my end scene, and I'm going from one scene to the other. Scene management. Yes?
Do you have a time delay?
Absolutely. It's all in your control. If you want to have a time delay, you can do that. If you want to have a transition scene, you can do that. You can have as many scenes as you'd like, right? How would you time delay it? You can use Unity's time stuff. You can use your own coroutine if you want to run, and when it's done running, it'll go to the next scene if you really want to. There's many things you can do to make this look nicer. Okay, so any other questions around scene management? So I've been talking for about just under 2 hours. I've got the scene manager working. I'm going to put this up on Colab right now and on on GitHub. So I'll say that created multiple scenes, right? Published. It's not really that descriptive, but it also tracks my work. And then I'm going to kind of tone this down. I'm going to go back to our trusty command line, which I already have open. I'm going to clear this, so CLS. I'm going to git add dot, adds all these things to the working area, to the staging area, and then git commit minus m for message, and then added, let's say we'll call it start scene and end scene. Git push, which should push everything to GitHub. So now, my friends, you have everything, including my code and everything, up on GitHub, and it's still pretty good. Any questions before we take a break? All right, so let's take a let's say a 15-minute break, because we're between classes, if you will, right now. Because remember, we do like 2 hours, and then we stop, and then we do more hours. This is about an hour and a half we've gone in a row. So I've started at 1:30, so it's about 3:30. No, it's about 2 hours. Yeah, it's almost about 2 hours. 8 minutes short. But we'll get to the next part. In the next part, what we're going to do is we're going to do our build, make it work on do a WebGL build, talk about the build a little bit, and then we'll talk about a couple things that are due. One thing that I want to talk about is your assignment 1 a little bit when we come back. I also want to talk about assignment 2 a little bit and what that looks like. So record all that stuff, and then we'll get back to just doing some special effects with MailPilot and see what we can get to. Okay, so let's take a break.